'Twas the indulgence of appetite that lay at the foundation of all the sins that were committed by the old world, and the same sins that brought judgments upon the world in the days of Noah exist in our day. Men and women now carry their eating and drinking so far that it ends in gluttony and drunkenness. This is the prevailing sin of our age. Taco Bell's former advertising campaign, Fourth Meal, celebrates the very habits that lie at the foundation of a lack of self-control and chronic disease. Eating between meals, which is closely tied with irregularity in eating. Drinking with one's meal. Eating as entertainment as opposed to nourishment. Late meals, which now is its own medical condition called night eating syndrome. And the stomach constantly being taxed, rarely receiving a chance to rest. Each and all of these habits hinder digestion, which in turn interferes with nutrition. And poor nutrition provides the foundation for disease. The use of beer awakens the taste for something stronger, and thus the liquor habit is established. Moderate drinking is the school in which men are educated for the drunkard's career. Yet so insidious is the work of alcohol that the highway to drunkenness is entered before the victim suspects his danger. The Bible nowhere sanctions the use of intoxicating wine. The wine that Christ made from water at the marriage feast of Cana was the pure juice of the grape. This is the new wine found in the cluster, of which the scriptures says, "Destroy it not, for a blessing is in it." Isaiah chapter 65 and verse 8. The antediluvian world that rejected the message of Noah can be divided into four mindsets or groups. The first of which we'll label the university district. Concerning universities, the reformer Martin Luther wrote these words: "I am much afraid that the universities will prove to be the great gates of hell, unless they diligently labor in explaining the Holy Scriptures and engraving them in the hearts of youth. I advise no one to place his child where the Scriptures do not reign paramount. Every institution in which men are not unceasingly occupied with the Word of God must become corrupt." The second group that rejected the message of Noah will label the church district. Not all the people before the flood were, in the fullest sense of the term, idol worshipers. Many professed to be worshipers of the true God, claiming that their idols were only representations of the deity, meant to provide a clear conception of the divine being. This class, however, were foremost in rejecting the preaching of Noah. We'll call the third group the amusement district. This is a group who, via attendance at worldly gatherings, developed a taste for unnatural excitements and amusements. By such, moral power is, by definition, weakened. And while those who love pleasure may keep up a form of godliness, they have no vital connection with God. Like King Saul of old, their faith is dead. Their zeal has departed. Their constant craving is for the next amusement or charming occurrence that can keep any feelings of boredom and despondency at bay. The fourth and last group we'll call the secular district. This group countenances no restrictions on self and desire. By them, God's law is thrown off, and thus there is nothing which this group desires so much as separation from God. Unwilling to wait for a future heavenly reward, they demand their inheritance right now. Their thoughts are centered on the present. Present enjoyment and selfish indulgence is the all-encompassing aim. As Cain went out from the presence of the Lord to seek his home, so do sinners seek happiness in forgetfulness of God. They do not like to retain God in their knowledge. The antediluvian world provided a year-round menu of appealing distractions that were calculated to attract different minds. Some of the most popular amusements were competitive sports. Today's games, such as football, hockey, boxing, have become schools of brutality, developing the same characteristics as did the games of ancient Rome. The love of domination and the pride in mere brute force exert a powerful influence upon the minds of the young. Other popular athletic games, though not so violent, are scarcely less objectionable because of the excess to which they are carried. Sensual indulgence displays itself in 1,000 forms, corrupting both men and women, old and young. Whether it be pornography in men or the tendency to reveal the body amongst women, the principle is the same. Satan is seeking to strip mankind of his likeness to his Creator. Physical nakedness is but an indicator of nakedness of the soul. Popular music demoralized the people of the antediluvian world. The minds of the youth were filled with nonsense, as evidenced by their empty talk and vain conversation. Their ears were trained for the debauched and vile lyrics and music of the day. And Satan, knowing what organs to excite and animate, improved the opportunity to engross and charm minds so that holiness was not desired. The contribution to the world made by Showtime, HBO, and their ilk is an education in all that God hates. The laws governing human behavior all still apply. By beholding, we become changed. And thus, there is no influence in the old world nor ours more powerful to poison the imagination, destroy religious impressions, and blunt the relish for the tranquil pleasures and sober realities of life than theatrical amusements. All these distractions were designed by Satan to create the atmosphere of a circus, leading to forgetfulness of God and a keeping of a form of godliness in a profession of faith, all while having lost the reality. Each of the four main groups that rejected the message of Noah held their own view on what comprised truth. The university district defined truth as natural law and the scientific method. Yet, these gave no explanation for, nor anticipation of, a worldwide flood. And thus the philosophers, doctors, and the educated class of society were prepared to reject the message. The church district defined truth as God's words, but in practice they pled tradition and religious custom, increasingly desiring the good life of the world. This group made of none effect the requirements of God for the sake of gaining worldly riches, honor, and power. Thus, the maxims, traditions, and requirements of men replaced the requirements of God. The amusement district's view on truth was that it is something which could be sourced from within. Thus the phrase, "Speak your truth," which suggests that one's personal views and ideas are sufficient for defining truth. This concept also provided a ready pathway for avoiding anything that might run contrary to one's own desires, or that might involve a sacrifice, or that was just simply inconvenient. But this type of approach to truth does not change the objective reality that there is truth, which can only be found through God the Father and in Jesus Christ, whom he hath sent. The secular district's response to truth was to deny its existence. Rather, their motto was, "Do what thou wilt." This they called freedom. In reality, however, they became slaves. Slaves to their own lusts, sinful habits, and the addictions which consume them. The antediluvian world had its own social and political movements that engrossed the minds of the people. The focus of minds was on the here and now, how to impose one's views upon society as a whole, and how to ensure that differing movements did not advance. But lost amidst the anger and rivalry of opposing politics and worldviews was the fast dwindling hours of probationary time. Soon, mercy would plead no longer. But this was largely hidden from the minds of the people due to the constant churn of the never-ending news cycle. Just prior to the flood, the aim of the philosophers was to express the certainty for centuries of the fixed nature of the laws that governed the physical world. They reasoned, as many reason now, that nature is above the God of nature, and that her laws are so firmly established that God himself could not change them. Thereby, human reason and intellect became their God. Romans chapter 1 and verse 22 states, "Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools." The aim of the religious community was to gain the control of government. ostensibly for the purpose of promoting good. Yet, when legal and political tools meant for shaping society are wielded by a religious class, they always corrupt the users. Christ utilized no political revolution to change the world. Rather, his kingdom was a kingdom of the heart. As it says in Zechariah chapter 4 and verse 6, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. The aim of those enthralled by entertainment was to follow your heart. Fulfilling the appetites, passions, and cravings of the heart was the all-encompassing focus. Yet Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 9 clearly states that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? The aim of those who had cast off all restraint was to eliminate any remembrance of God. Thus, the rallying cry expressing the existence of a heathen heaven, which today is echoed by the modern phrase, heathen Valhalla awaits me. But once again, the scriptures are clear. For if we sin willfully after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 27. The science community stood on natural law. The secular community dismissed the existence of law. Those seeking amusement placed feeling above law. All the while, the religious community proclaimed that the divine law was no longer in force, flattering themselves that they could sin with impunity and that God would not be strict in punishing their iniquity. The religious community entered into an overmastering fatal deception. And if those who claim to follow God and seek his approval diminish his laws, and thereby lower in the minds of the people his right to rule, how are those who reject God's existence to be saved? As the time of their probation was closing, the antediluvians gave themselves up to exciting amusements and festivities. Those who possessed influence and power were bent on keeping the minds of the people engrossed with mirth and pleasure, lest any should be impressed by the last solemn warning. As if seeking to combine New Year's Eve, the Super Bowl, Mardi Gras, and the Sturgis motorcycle rally, all as one event in the same place. A massive carnival-like atmosphere was kept at fever's pitch in the immediate vicinity of the Ark. Do we not see the same repeated in our day? While God's servants give the message that the end of all things is at hand, the world is absorbed in amusements and pleasure seeking. There is a constant round of excitement that causes indifference to God and prevents the people from being impressed by the truths which alone can save them from the coming destruction. Amidst this carnival, Noah gave his last solemn appeal to the people. with an agony of desire that words cannot express. He entreated them to seek a refuge while it might be found. We're at the end of all living. How long will you despise the day of grace? Hell is chasing you. Terror is upon you. My people, God's love does not cripple his justice. God means what he says. Why are you not doing what God has said? In mercy, God hath provided a way of escape. Rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft. God is not going to make an excuse for this generation. The day of salvation is ending. The door of opportunity is closing. My people, enter the ark of safety. The ark, now finished in every part, was stored with food for man and beast. And God commanded Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Mercy had now ceased its pleadings for the guilty race. Noah and his household were within the ark, and the Lord shut him in. A flash of dazzling light was seen, hovered before the entrance of the ark. The massive door, which it was impossible for those within the ark to close, was slowly swung to its place by an unseen hand. Noah was shut in, and the rejectors of God's mercy were shut out. The seal of heaven was on that door. God had shut it, and God alone could open it. For 7 days after Noah and his family entered the ark, there appeared no sign of the coming storm. During this period, their faith was tested. It was a time of triumph to the world without. The apparent delay confirmed them in the belief that Noah's message was a delusion and that the flood would never come. The people continued their sport and revelry. They even made a joke of the signal manifestations of God's power. They gathered in crowds about the ark, deriding its inmates with a daring violence which they had never before ventured upon. But on the 8th day, dark clouds overspread the heavens. There followed the muttering of thunder and the flash of lightning. Darker and darker grew the heavens. The beasts were roaming about in the wildest terror, and their discordant cries seemed to moan out their own destiny and the fate of man. Soon, large drops of rain began to fall. The world had never witnessed anything like this, and the hearts of men were struck with fear. Faster and faster came the falling rain. Then the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Water appeared to come from the clouds in mighty cataracts. Rivers broke away from their boundaries and overflowed the valleys. As the violence of the storm increased, trees, buildings, rocks, and earth were hurled in every direction. The terror of man and beast was beyond description. Above the roar of the tempest was heard the wailing of a people that had despised the authority of God and the day of grace. Some of the people bound their children and themselves upon powerful animals, knowing that these were tenacious of life and would climb to the highest points to escape the rising waters. Some fastened themselves to lofty trees on the summit of hills or mountains, but the trees were uprooted, and with their burden of living beings were hurled into the seething billows. As the waters rose higher and higher, the people fled for refuge to the loftiest mountains. Often, man and beast would struggle together for a foothold until both were swept away. Friends, another storm is coming. The earth will again be swept by the desolating wrath of God, and sin and sinners will be destroyed. The sins that called for vengeance upon the antediluvian world exist today. The intense worldliness of that generation is equaled by that of the generation now living. The issues in the press teem with records of murder, crimes so cold-blooded and causeless that it seems as though every instinct of humanity were blotted out. The spirit of anarchy is permeating all nations, and the outbreaks that from time to time excite the horror of the world are but indications of the pent-up fires of passion and lawlessness that, having once escaped control, will fill the earth with woe and desolation. Thus, now God calls in mercy for man to obey his sacred precepts. For when great and wise men had proved to their satisfaction that it was impossible for the world to be destroyed by water, when the fears of the people were quieted, when all regarded Noah's prophecy as a delusion and looked upon him as a fanatic, then it was that God's time had come.